Welcome back to the Bill and Doug Show. It's Doug with your Monday Rants. Thanks for being here. Like, subscribe, tell a friend about the Bill and Doug Show. We do national college football. We do a bunch of Ohio State stuff, obviously. We'll have a playoff show on Tuesday night. Ohio State picks on Thursday, Ohio State UCLA, national picks on Friday. 3 rants here today, and I'm backing off the SEC just a little bit. I do have a thing at the end, but I want to rant at the start about what is right with college football right now. And listen, we have never been a show that has spent a lot of time talking about private equity. We have never spent a lot of time talking about lawsuits, because I don't think college football fans, the number one reason they love the sport is for lawsuit talk. So we like to talk about teams. We like to talk about players. We like to talk about coaches. We like to talk about ball. But money matters, and we're interested in the money, how it affects the ball. And I will just say, like, right now as we sit here, I hope it is a reminder to everybody in charge how well the 12-team playoff is working right now. And if you're going to mess with it, and it feels like we might get to 16 teams sooner than later. Apparently, there's a proposal from Tony Petitti, the Big Ten commissioner, maybe to go to 24. I think that would potentially be moderately disastrous for the regular season of college football. I certainly am not alone in that opinion. That makes me feel like, I guess, if you were a 4-team playoff person and you felt like the 12-team playoff was going to be a disaster, I guess like that's how I would feel as a 12-team playoff person thinking about a 24-team playoff. And maybe we would get there. I think a lot of the 4-team people have gotten here, are living in the 12-team world, and are thinking, yeah, it's actually pretty good. I don't know. We can run this back in 9 years when we have a 24-team playoff. And old, super bald, with a beard down to my knees, goofball Doug, who's maybe still around college football, saying, you know what? I do love the 24-team playoff. But I have a hard time envisioning it. And I don't know if there's a lot of you like nodding along with like, yeah, 24. 24 sounds good. Because what is happening right now is there's a group of very good teams who are in very good playoff position. If we were trying to choose 4 right now, we might be in a spot where we'd be looking at 2 from the SEC and 2 from the Big Ten. And we even could reach a spot where the SEC and Big Ten title games would be almost unimportant, because we knew those were going to be the 4 teams in the playoff and just playing for seeding, and nothing that was happening in the Big 12 or the ACC or in the second tier of any of those conferences would matter. And maybe something will trip us up, but we might be headed in a 4-team world toward Ohio State, Indiana, Alabama, Texas A&M. And I don't know how well anybody would be feeling about that right now. At the very least, I think the Big 12 and the ACC would feel left out. It would be hard to find extreme meeting in the games that are left for the Big 12 and the ACC. What are you doing with Georgia? What are you doing with Vanderbilt? What are you doing with Oregon? What are you doing with USC? What are you doing with these other teams who are having really good seasons, not perfect seasons, but good seasons, who are still fighting for the playoff and still are thinking about a national championship, and they'd be fighting for the Fiesta Bowl or the Peach Bowl or the whatever we call the Citrus Bowl now, which is fine. And that was good enough. It had to be good enough for a long time. But I just want to remind us how good the 12-team playoff is right now, because as we look at it, we have 3 undefeated teams in the Power 4. We have Indiana, Ohio State, and Texas A&M. We have 7 one-loss teams in the Power 4. Georgia Tech, Texas Tech, BYU, Oregon, Alabama, Georgia, and Ole Miss. We have 13 two-loss teams. Virginia, Pitt, Louisville, Miami, Cincinnati, Houston, Utah, USC, Michigan, Notre Dame, Texas, Vanderbilt, Oklahoma. And I would say all of those teams are in it right now. All of those teams are still thinking about the playoff. Some of them need help, but they're all thinking, if we win out and maybe we get a little help, we have a chance to get in the 12-team playoff. So that is 23 teams in that situation. Of those 23 teams, 15 of the 23 play a game in the final 3 weeks of the regular season against one of the other 23. There are only 8 of those 23 who don't. So the teams at the top, a lot of them are playing bangers down the stretch that matter for rivalry, that matter for pride, that matter because you hate those guys, but are also mattering in the college football playoff picture. Let's run through those 10 games. And this is the point that, like, these 10 games really have stakes. And I feel like when we're talking about playoff expansion, we're talking about stakes in the regular season. And I think if you were a 4-team playoff person, what you were worried about is reducing stakes in the regular season, because you were taking away the one loss can ruin your season idea. But what I actually think has happened is stakes have been increased, because if we were in the 4-team playoff, as I said, those 4 teams might be set. And then a lot of these 2-loss teams, they would know they were out. They would be out of the discussion. So there would not be stakes to this level in these games. But if you doubled the playoff field, almost all the teams that I just named, I'm not sure that like Louisville would still be guaranteed a spot in the 2014 playoff right now with the way that things are unfolding. But sort of what we would have is everybody I just named, they're in the playoff. And so now what are we doing with this back part of the regular season? There's some 3-loss teams that would still be alive, right? Oh, if we do this and we finish 9-3 and somebody else loses, right? So we would increase the stakes for a subset of current 3-loss teams. But like, is that the goal? The goal is just money. If you're trying to expand to 24, the only goal is money. I do think legitimately the goal in expanding from 4 to 12 was access and opportunity and increasing the stakes for more fan bases. 12 to 24, you're actually lowering stakes. So whatever, is there a math name for like a curve that like stakes here? 4-team playoff stakes are kind of low for a lot of teams. Now we go to 12-team playoff, the stakes rise. But if you go too far, now you're lowering the stakes on the other side of that curve again. Whereas right now, think about these games, these 10 games, the next 3 weeks. 3 of them are this week. Texas, Georgia, that's 1-loss Georgia and 2-loss Texas. Notre Dame, Pitt, that's 2-loss Pitt and 2-loss Notre Dame. Pitt has 3 bangers to end the season against Notre Dame, Georgia Tech, and Miami. So Pitt is almost like, man, like we kind of control our own destiny here. But all they have to do is win those 3 games and then win the ACC championship. But game day is going to Notre Dame Pitt at Pitt this week. That's a great thing for Pitt, right? For instance. And I don't think they'd be going in a 4-team playoff. And I don't know if they'd be going in a 24-team playoff. But in a 12, they're there. Because Pitt, Notre Dame really matters this week. And the other one that matters this week is Oklahoma, Alabama. Because Oklahoma's a 2-loss team. Alabama's a 1-loss team. Alabama's, kind of had some close games. It's not a mid discussion. Oklahoma needs to beat Alabama to stay in it. They're a 2-loss team. Actually, if Oklahoma beats Alabama, like they're in a pretty good spot, because now you're a 2-loss team with the winner over Alabama. You're going to win a lot of fights in the committee room with that. If you lose, you're a 3-loss team. You're probably out. High stakes. What great stakes for Alabama. What great stakes are now Alabama, not, still some for Alabama, because now if you lose to Oklahoma and then all of a sudden, like Auburn's been about as weird of a team as you can find in college football this year. Now you're opening up the door for, if your rival does something weird to you in the last week of the regular season, is Alabama all of a sudden teetering for a playoff spot? So still stakes for Alabama, incredible stakes for Oklahoma, that has had a good year, that has had a bounce back year, hasn't had a perfect year by any stretch. But I like that, as mid as I think Oklahoma is, I like that Oklahoma fans have this level of stakes in a game like this. They'd be fired up for Alabama regardless, but think about the stakes. 3 games like that this week, 3 next week. USC, Oregon next week. That Oregon win over Iowa creates this game. That USC win over Northwestern last week creates this game. Think about what USC Oregon has been over time and what it now can be when you think about a 1-loss Oregon team and a 2-loss USC team. Or like USC basically needs to win that game to have a chance to make the playoff. Oregon can probably afford, maybe Oregon's probably in at 10-2, but it's getting like this still high stakes for Oregon in a game like this, right? Because they're not going to get in with 3. Now you lose 2. Now what if you lose to Washington the last game of the year? So USC, Oregon, stakes. Cincinnati, BYU in 2 weeks, stakes in the Big 12. That's a 1-loss BYU team and a 2-loss Cincinnati team. Real stakes there. And then Pitt, Georgia Tech, as we mentioned. Georgia Tech, one-loss team in the ACC. I think the best team in the ACC, at least like the most consistent team. I think the team that has like the highest floor that doesn't just fall off a cliff. Of course, they took a loss the other week against whoever they lost to, NC State, right? But like big game. Even if Pitt loses to Notre Dame, so then the stakes aren't quite there for Pitt. Like the stakes are there for Georgia Tech. But as it stands right now, big game. And then there are 4 games on the last weekend of the regular season, rivalry weekend. Miami, Pitt. Last year, Miami on the last weekend of the regular season came north, went to Syracuse, lost, got knocked out of the ACC championship game, got knocked out of the playoffs. So, like, is this going to be a stakes game on this level for both teams? Do we think Pitt's going to beat Notre Dame and Georgia Tech? Probably not. But that's going to be a stakes game for Miami, probably. All right. And as we stand right now, it qualifies. Georgia Tech, I actually think could borderline not be quite a play-in game, because I would, at the moment, call Georgia Tech the ACC favorite. I don't think Georgia's guaranteed a playoff spot right now, because I think it's possible Georgia loses to both Texas and Georgia Tech in the last 3 weeks of the regular season, and all of a sudden you're looking at a 9-3 Georgia team, and are you sure they're in? What's their best win? I don't think they're in, actually, at 9-3. So potentially tremendous stakes in what is a great rivalry game. Was a great game, 9 overtimes last year. Georgia Tech, this setup helps make stakes for that game. Texas A&M. Texas A&M looks like the best team in the SEC. Texas might need, probably, if Texas beats Georgia and then loses to Texas A&M, 9-3 Texas has a case with the win over Georgia, and then losses to Ohio State and Texas A&M, and also the horrible Florida loss. But still real stakes there for Texas. Texas A&M is probably in either way, but real stakes, I think, for Texas. So I would call that a stakes game among 2 real playoff contenders. And then, of course, Michigan, Ohio State. Ohio State, probably borderline ticket punched at this point. Maybe not even borderline. UCLA and Rutgers before this Michigan game at the end of the year. I mean, it's hard to imagine Ohio State losing either of those 2 games. 11-0. They lose to Michigan, they're still in. But real stakes for Michigan, that's a win and you're in game for Michigan. Because it's like, how might the Big Ten get a 4th playoff team? Michigan beats Ohio State and finishes 10-2 with the win over the previously undefeated number 1 team in the country. You're in. You're in. That 10-2 Michigan team is in. So tremendous stakes there. They would not be in a 4-team playoff, and in a 24-team playoff, a 9-3 Michigan team with a loss to Ohio State is in probably anyway. So this is the only scenario that creates playoff stakes for Michigan in that rivalry game. So I don't know that there's anybody that disagrees with this at the moment, right? We had disagreement in the move to 12. We had disagreement. Some wanted to stay at 4. Are there people beyond the Big Ten commissioner who wants to make more money? Is there anybody that's for 24 teams? Is there any? I can't imagine that there is anybody. Even 16 teams would take a little bit of the stakes away here. You're providing more wiggle room. You're creating a situation where Georgia's probably in by now. In a 16-team playoff, 9-3 Georgia's probably in, which means if Georgia loses to Texas and to Georgia Tech, they're probably still in. Texas could be in a spot, probably not in an 8-4. Anyway, most of what happens in college football is by accident. And I do think I'm not sure. I like 12. I like rewarding those 4 best teams with a week off. I don't even know if they understood how possibly perfectly they were nailing the bullseye on stakes for college football. And it's a reminder that we're there, and let's appreciate it while we are there in this era. And maybe we'll be looking back on this someday and saying, like, man, those were the days. The 12 team, those were the days, baby. I also hope the people in charge who are maybe pushing for conference for playoff expansion to a huge degree. I think we could all live with 16. But if you're really pushing for a lot beyond that, I hope they take a moment right now, because I do think monetarily there's a chance that if you think, well, you're going to make this much more money in the playoff, I do think you could hurt yourself enough financially by decreasing the stakes of the regular season that it might be a wash. My rant is sports is good. My rant is college football is good. Let's not screw it up too much. All right, number 2. I did this on our Ohio State show on Sunday for our Substack subscribers. If you want to follow Bill and Doug on Substack, billandougosu.substack.com. Like, subscribe, tell a friend. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening back on a podcast feed, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss anything that we do here. And the other thing is, I would tell you about our friends at Rhoback. It's just cool gear. And the game day collection that they have, the thing about that Rhoback I think is interesting, maybe compared to some of the other gear that you have for your team, is they just sell regular nice clothes. They just have hoodies and polos and quarter zips that don't have any logo on them at all, that are just blue or black or gray or white and are just high quality, comfortable. They hang on you well, like good quality clothes. But then they also have the game day collection, where you can maybe get a shirt with like a bunch of gazillion little logos all over it. If you want to go that look, you can go more like a subtle stripe, a subtle logo somewhere, but it's adding your fandom to what is already a very high quality piece of good looking attire. So like, that's not, sometimes you just find a crazy t-shirt. And of course you got to have crazy t-shirts for your team in your collection, but like, this is a next level kind of thing. Oh, I have a nice quarter zip. It happens to have a little subtle logo for my favorite team on it. So if you want to go check it out, rhoback.com, RHOBACK.com. We'll give you a 20% off your first order. So you put in this code when you order, BAD. That's BAD, BAD20. BAD20, BAD20. You'll get 20% off your first order from our friends at rhoback.com. My second rant is this. The Heisman is going to come down to conference championship weekend. And I've talked about this for a long time, but the reaction to some of the Fernando Mendoza last drive moments for Indiana against Penn State led to a lot of Heisman headlines, a lot of Heisman hyperbole. And if you're just looking for something to say or looking for something to write in the moment, I guess I get it. Gus Johnson lost his mind in the Indiana Penn State moment and just said, like, hand Fernando Mendoza the Heisman. That's not reality, because what actually I think is going to work out for reality is conference championship weekend, the Big Ten and the SEC title games have a chance to like not matter in the playoff picture, because I think it's quite possible maybe only Texas Tech would have something to say about this if Texas Tech finishes as a 1-loss, looking great Big 12 champ. But otherwise, I think our top 4 teams might be the 4 teams in the SEC and Big Ten championship games if those 4 teams are Ohio State, Indiana, Texas A&M, and Alabama. And the outcome is just determining who's the 1 seed, who's the 3 seed, who's the 2 seed, who's the 4 seed, whatever. As it stands right now, my guess would be the Big Ten champ is the 1 seed, the Big Ten losers the 3 seed, the SEC champs the 2 seed, the SEC losers the 4 seed. That would be my guess. So then what's the point? Why are we going to a neutral site in a dome on the first Saturday in December to have a little conference party and play those games? Well, if it doesn't matter that much for the playoff, because a year ago you were playing for a bye, and that's a big deal, because I did think always like the toughest spot to be in with the way the playoff is currently shaped is you're a team that makes your conference championship game, makes the playoff, and doesn't have a bye. So you're potentially set up that you could wind up playing a team who did not make its conference championship game, which means it's not as good. It's not as rewarding of a season, right? You weren't good enough to make your conference championship game. So that's a week off that you get. And now maybe you're playing a team who did play a conference championship game, but didn't get a bye. So you could be in a spot in like a 6-11 game where the 6 just played a conference championship game and the 11 didn't. And that's an extra game for the 6. And it's an extra week of rest for the 11. And that could, I think that could determine a game or two, I think, with the way it works out now. So I understand why they changed the policy with the top 4 seeds, but that's reality there. So a year ago, Big Ten, SEC, the winner's getting a bye, the loser's not, by rule. So now that's different. And I think it's the right move. Boise State of 3 last year was crazy. I mean, like people love underdogs too much. Like just like also live in the world. Underdogs should have access. The underdog shouldn't be the 3 seed. That was bonkers. It was so bonkers. Everybody was like, we can't do this again. You're playing for the Heisman. Conference championship weekend is going to be for the Heisman Trophy because right now, the 2 favorites in the Heisman race, I looked at 2 betting sites. In one of them, Ohio State quarterback Julian Sand and Indiana quarterback Fernando Mendoza are tied at the odds at plus 165, and the other, Sands at plus 180, and Fernando Mendoza is plus 185, so basically tied. As things stand now, they would face off in the Big Ten championship game. Ty Simpson, the Alabama quarterback, is plus 500. He's the 3rd favorite in one of them. He's plus 390 as the 3rd favorite in the other. And the 4th favorite is Marcel Reed, the Texas A&M quarterback, who's plus 850 in one and plus 700 in another. Because guess what? The best path to the Heisman Trophy is still to be the quarterback of a great team, to be the quarterback of the best team. So for everybody who was shouting, like, give Fernando Mendoza the Heisman, my question is, if Ohio State beats Indiana in the Big Ten championship game, are you, with your Heisman ballot, going to vote for the quarterback whose team lost that game over the quarterback who probably played a role in Ohio State's win and whose team won that game? So I think the Heisman is going to, and I say this as a Heisman voter, my guess is that the Heisman will go to the quarterback of the winning team of the Big Ten championship game. So if you're watching that game and thinking like, 1 versus 3, I don't even know, does it matter? Well, people like lifting trophies. And also there's a second trophy that I think is going to be at stake. And then Ty Simpson and Marcel Reed, if for whatever reason the Big Ten championship game is a slog and both quarterbacks throw 2 picks and it's a defensive game and you watch that game and regardless of who wins, you watch it and think, I don't know, then Ty Simpson can win it. If Alabama wins the SEC title game and he looks awesome. And I would say maybe Marcel Reed could do the same because you just have to be in the moment. But you can come from like out of nowhere because being the quarterback of Texas A&M who's in the SEC championship game actually isn't nowhere. And he's the 4th favorite right now. If Texas A&M smokes Alabama and Marcel Reed looks awesome and the Big Ten championship game is weird, Marcel Reed could win the Heisman. Absolutely. Now, if you want to throw, the only other name you could throw in, I think, is Jeremiah Love at this point, the Notre Dame running back who's not going to participate that weekend. But, game against Pitt, still ahead. Like, Jeremiah Love is a great individual talent. People see that, but he has to make his case during the regular season because he does not participate in conference championship weekend. And I actually think like it's not at the top of the list for Notre Dame of why they would want to give up independence, but I still think that is where the Heisman more often than not, and people say now it's like, why would you, this is also the case. I think the Heisman should be given out at the end of the year. People are like, well, why would you do that? Because now you're just going to give it to like whoever's team wins the national championship. I kind of think we're already there. Travis Hunter was the exception to the rule last year, and Ashton Jeanty was the exception to the rule. Like that, and Travis Hunter and Ashton Jeanty absolutely deserved to finish 1 and 2. It was kind of a weird year last year, but like Dylan Gabriel was a Heisman finalist last year off Oregon, winning the Big Ten championship game as the undefeated number 1 team in the country. But I don't know that Dylan Gabriel, there wasn't like a huge Dylan Gabriel push. So I understand it's not a hard and fast rule, but as it's shaking out right now, it's where we are. So just like be realistic about it. Just don't hand out the Heisman in the second weekend in November. Like be an adult. Because we see where things are. So the Heisman's going to be handed out on conference championship weekend, which is kind of a playoff game because the best teams earn those spots. It doesn't mean that a Heisman candidate can't overcome that and win it. Travis Hunter did it. But like, I think going forward more often than not, it's been a case like kind of a decent amount of the time in the past. It really helps to be in that game when all the eyeballs are on a few teams and you're getting a good test against another highly ranked competitive team. So anyway, I just thought that it was immature. I thought like hand the Heisman to Fernando Mendoza. If you said that or wrote that based off this past weekend, if you said he had a Heisman moment, it's like, well, Heisman moments doesn't mean you should win the Heisman. It's like it would be in your Heisman film that they would show at the awards ceremony if you're a finalist. That's okay. You had a Heisman moment. Doesn't mean you win the Heisman. It's a Heisman type moment. If you said hand in the Heisman, you're not a serious person when it comes to college football. Okay. Last thing is this. Let's all remind ourselves to be wary. I hate the word wary when it comes to college football, but let's be wary of preseason hype around SEC quarterbacks, because 2 days after LSU benched quarterback Garrett Nussmeier and Florida benched quarterback DJ Lagway, 2 interim coaches benching those quarterbacks, which is like, when you're an interim coach, like, you're not beholden to anybody. You're not kind of worried about the future. You're not worried about like, oh, is this guy going to transfer if I bench him? What is it? It's like, you're just trying to like do the best you can for the guys in that locker room in that moment. Sometimes when you're the head coach, I'm not saying it's wrong, but you're beholden to more things than that individual moment for everybody in that locker room. You're thinking big picture for the team. Little picture, those interim coaches said, no, let's try somebody else for the moment, right? Or let's let them clear their head or whatever it is. I just would like to remind you, SEC quarterbacks in preseason Heisman odds, the ones that I could find, Arch Manning was number 1 in the preseason Heisman odds. Quarterback of Texas. He's not seen that way anymore. Garrett Nussmeier was tied for 2nd in the preseason Heisman odds. He just got benched by the interim coach. Lenora Sellers from South Carolina was 5th in the preseason Heisman odds. Ty Simpson from Alabama was 7th in the preseason Heisman odds. Congratulations to Ty Simpson to be worthy of that. And DJ Lagway from Florida was 10th in the preseason Heisman odds and was like everyone's favorite, uber talented dark horse, DJ Lagway. And last season, Carson Beck in Georgia. Carson Beck, a lot of Carson Beck preseason talk. Carson Beck as potential number 1 pick in the draft. Carson Beck in the Heisman. Garrett Nussmeier talked about that way. Number 1 pick in the draft. Garrett Nussmeier in the Heisman. Just missed me with it. So when we get there, like next August, and you're puffing up the latest future number 1 pick quarterback from the SEC, future Heisman finalist from the SEC, like, we're on to you. Because it's a fraud. Because here we are, and your interim coaches are benching your Heisman candidates. Because it's just another example of the puffed up fraudulence of course, there are good players in the SEC, but it is very hard for the SEC to ever be as good as people make them out to be, because there's nothing that college football likes more than hyperventilating about overrated SEC teams and players. Okay. Those are our rants. We're in a good spot. I think we're in a good spot for it. Really good last 3 weeks of the regular season. Like a conference championship weekend. I will be curious how everybody reacts to it. If we do get these games that, if we are having discussions, the thing I always say is, are the players and coaches and fans for 3.5 hours during the game going to care? I think they will. I think while we could get some talk around the SEC and Big Ten, like, what's the point of this? And does it matter? I'll be curious to see how we all do that together when we get to conference championship weekend. The Big 12 and the the ACC conference championship games are really going to matter, because there's probably going to be in a position where the winner's in and the loser's out. Very likely. Not guaranteed, but those are going to be mini playoff games. Of course, we know the discussion has started. Like, what if the ACC champ doesn't even get in to the playoff because they take champs from 2 other leagues? Whatever. Like, that's fine. We can have that conversation if we get to it. Could be in a spot where, like, Georgia Tech and Texas Tech, if they lose, they still could get in. But there's going to be at least one team playing, I think, in each of the ACC and the Big 12 title games who it is a playoff game for them. Winning, they're in. Losing, they're out. So that brings excitement to it. But I think perhaps the most exciting thing possibly about the SEC and Big Ten title games from a big picture will be that the Heisman is going to be determined on those fields on that day. You guys, if you want more Ohio State coverage, can find us, billanddougosu.substack.com. Find our Substack page over there. Like what we're doing here, drop a review on Apple Pods if you'd like to do that. We always love the comments during the show or afterward here on YouTube. And just like, make sure you're subscribed so that you don't miss any of the national college content we do here, any of the Ohio State football content that we do here. And bottom line is, of course, we're just grateful to be able to hang out and talk football with you guys. All right. That's it for now. I'm Doug Lesmerises. And that was the Bill and Doug Show.